I couldn't remember the last time I'd been so happy to get off work early. All day, I'd been bracing myself for the usual night shift grind, figuring I'd be stuck there until morning. But at the last minute, my supervisor told me I could leave by 11 p.m. I practically skipped out the door, smiling like an idiot, ready to surprise my wife, Mia. I could already picture her face lighting up when I walked in. I couldn't wait to kick back and relax with her after a long day. Knowing she wouldn't expect me for hours, I felt like a kid with a secret, so I stopped by the store and picked up a nice bottle of wine and some flowers. As I pulled into the driveway, though, I started to feel something wasn't quite right. Mia's car wasn't there, and the house was dark. Maybe she ran out for something, I thought, trying to brush off the weird feeling creeping up my spine. But when I walked inside, the silence hit me like a brick. The lights were off, and there was no sign of her anywhere. Where could she be? I mumbled, pulling out my phone and dialing her number, my fingers tapping impatiently on the counter as I waited. She finally picked up, but her tone surprised me. She sounded flat, almost irritated. "Hey, Mia, where are you?" I asked, trying to keep my excitement alive. There was a long, uncomfortable pause before she finally replied, her voice cold as ice. "I'm not coming home tonight." I froze, feeling my chest tighten. "What? What do you mean you're not coming home?" "Did I stutter, Leo?" She snapped, her irritation slicing right through me. "I said I have something to take care of." I felt a sick knot form in my stomach as I held the phone, trying to understand what I'd just heard. Mia had never been so dismissive, so cold. Confusion turned to anger as I stood there, my grip tightening around the phone. "Mia, this is ridiculous. Why are you talking to me like this?" I said, my frustration bubbling up, but I realized she'd already hung up. I stood there in the quiet house, the silence pressing in on me. Something wasn't right. Her behavior felt downright disrespectful. Anger simmered just below the surface as I looked out at the empty driveway, determined to find out what was going on. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table, jaw clenched, waiting for her. Eventually, I heard the hum of her car outside, and my heart pounded as she walked through the door, looking as if nothing had happened. "Morning," she said offhandedly, like it was just any other day. She didn't even look at me as she headed up the stairs, throwing over her shoulder, "I'm going to shower." I felt my chest tighten with frustration. Not a single explanation. No apology. Just a casual morning, like everything was fine. But I kept quiet, letting her think she'd gotten away with it, at least for a moment. As soon as I heard the water running upstairs, something pushed me outside to her car. The engine was still warm, and I slipped into the driver's seat, feeling my pulse quicken. My eyes went straight to her navigation tablet, and with shaking hands, I scrolled through her recent destinations. One address jumped out at me. A house on the other side of town, 251 Oakwood Drive. I stared at it, feeling sick. Why on earth would she be there all night? Without even thinking, I opened the glove compartment. I didn't know what I was hoping, or fearing, to find. But there it was, an open box of safety devices with one missing. My stomach dropped. Mia and I hadn't used birth control in years. There was no reason for them to be here. I felt a wave of betrayal wash over me as the pieces fell into place in the worst possible way. Barely able to think straight, I went back into the house and sat down at the kitchen table, waiting in silence until I heard her come down the stairs. Mia walked into the room, her hair still wet, a towel wrapped around her head. She stopped when she saw the look on my face. "What?" she asked, her voice already defensive. "We need to talk," I said, trying to keep my tone steady but firm. She rolled her eyes. "About what now?" "About where you were last night." I held her gaze, her car keys in my hand, waiting for her to explain. Her face darkened. "Are you kidding me, Leo? You went through my car? My stuff? Just answer the question." I shot back, my frustration finally boiling over. "Whose house is 251 Oakwood Drive? Why were you there all night?" Her expression flickered. Guilt, anger, maybe even defiance. She straightened, crossing her arms. "It's Oliver's house," she said coolly. I felt my heart plummet. "Oliver? The guy from your office?" "Yeah," she replied, her tone disturbingly calm. "I stayed the night there." I clenched my fists, struggling to hold back the fury building inside me. "You think I'm an idiot, Mia?" You spend the night at another man's house. I find protection in your car, and I'm supposed to believe nothing happened? Her eyes narrowed. So, what if I stayed there? It's not what you think. Then what is it, Mia? I demanded, my voice shaking with anger. Is he your lover? She let out a slow, exasperated sigh, her defensive tone softening slightly. No, Leo. Oliver isn't my lover. I glared at her, feeling my patience hanging by a thread. Then why were you at his house? I demanded, barely keeping my voice steady. And don't even think about lying to me, Mia. I deserve the truth. Mia's posture changed. Her arms dropped to her sides, and her expression hardened into something colder. Look, I had problems at work, all right? Oliver covered for me, helped me out in front of our bosses. If he hadn't stepped in, I could have lost my job. So, I went over there to thank him. Thank him, I repeated, my voice thick with disbelief. So, you decided to be with him out of gratitude? Mia didn't even blink. It was my idea, Leo. Oliver didn't ask for it. I knew he was attracted to me, and I decided to give him something for the favor. I felt a chill run through me. You gave him something? You're saying you were with him, just to thank him. She looked at me, calm and unbothered. Yes, she replied flatly. It wasn't cheating, Leo. It was just a transaction. A voluntary, honest deal. No feelings involved. I stared at her, completely speechless. The coldness in her voice, the way she spoke about it, like it was just another line item in her career plan, I could barely process it. You sold yourself to keep your job, I said, each word feeling like poison on my tongue. She shrugged, utterly unfazed. I gave him a little happiness for his help, that's all. My heart twisted painfully as her words sank in. Mia, how could you even think that was okay? It was a professional courtesy, she answered with an indifferent shrug. He did me a favor, I did him one. End of story. My world was crumbling around me, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on my chest. But Mia didn't seem to care. In fact, she was looking at me with that same nonchalant expression, as if she was smoothing over a minor inconvenience. Leo, she continued, her voice unnervingly calm. There's no need to dwell on this. Sure, you're upset, but you're my husband. I love you. One night, one mistake shouldn't be the reason for a divorce or for ruining what we have. She said it like she was trying to reassure me, like she was sweeping dust under the rug. My head spun with disbelief. She wasn't apologizing. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. No, she was acting as if this was something we could ignore, something we could pretend hadn't happened. Let's just forget about it, she added, her tone light, like she was suggesting we ignore an overdue bill. I couldn't respond. My throat felt tight, my mouth dry. I sat there in stunned silence, and that's when her eyes drifted to the bouquet on the counter. The flowers I'd picked up the night before to surprise her. She actually smiled. Wow, honey, are these for me? She walked over, admiring the petals like she hadn't just admitted to sleeping with another man. You're so good to me. Without waiting for an answer, she turned to the wine bottle I'd brought, uncorked it with the eels, and poured 2 glasses, her casual actions making me sick. She handed me a glass, raising her own in a casual toast. Leo, I'm sorry. Maybe I acted stupidly, but let's just forget about it and move on, she said, her tone light and almost playful, as if this were nothing more than a little spat. I just sat there, stunned and unable to move. I watched her, my mind reeling, as she sipped her wine, studying me over the rim of her glass. The way she calmly dismissed it all, like she thought her charm could erase the betrayal, made my blood boil. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't even pretending to be sorry. To her, this was just another day. Without a word, I drained my glass of wine and stood up. Mia looked at me with a curious expression, but I couldn't stay in that room any longer. The air felt thick with her lies. I needed space, so I stepped outside, gulping in the cool morning air, trying to clear my head. As I paced back and forth on the porch, the reality hit me harder than I expected. Mia's betrayal was bad enough, but the way she'd acted, like it didn't matter, stung even more. She expected me to play the fool, to keep being the doting husband, while she lived her double life. But I knew better now. This wasn't a one-time mistake. No, Mia's coldness, her complete lack of remorse. It was clear this wasn't an accident. It was a choice. She'd chosen to betray me, to lie to me. And somehow, she thought she'd get away with it. She thought she had me fooled, but she was wrong. If she wanted to play games, I'd play along, but it would be on my terms. As I stood there, watching the sunrise, a plan started forming in my mind. Mia thought she had control, that she could manipulate me. But I knew now where her weakness lay, her career. If she was willing to betray her marriage for it, then her job was the perfect place to strike. A calm, subtle revenge, something she wouldn't see coming. The more I thought about it, the clearer my plan became. Mia wanted me to feel like an idiot? Fine. I let her think she'd succeeded. But before I handed her those divorce papers, before she thought she could walk away without consequence, I'd give her something to remember. A small, elegant revenge, something fitting. As I stood there, watching the world wake up around me, I allowed myself the first smile I'd felt in hours. Mia thought she was in control, but she was about to learn what it felt like to be played. I knew I needed to talk to a lawyer. But first, I had a little surprise to plan. I took a deep breath, then headed back inside, determined to keep up appearances for a little while longer. Mia, I called, stepping into the kitchen where she was sipping her wine, still smug and satisfied. She looked up, her face softening as she noticed the change in my tone. I forced a small smile and said, "I've been thinking." I settled back into my seat across from Mia, putting on the kindest face I could muster. "Maybe you're right," I began, letting out a sigh that masked the resentment bubbling beneath. "We've been through a lot together. One mistake, it shouldn't tear us apart." Her eyes softened, a faint smile touching her lips as if she hadn't expected me to be so agreeable. "I knew you'd see reason, Leo. We're stronger than this," she said, her tone almost proud, as though she'd achieved some great victory. I gave her a slow nod, forcing a small smile. "Let's move on," I replied, making it sound genuine. "I don't want to lose what we've built." She reached across the table, took my hand, and gave it a reassuring squeeze, as if everything had fallen right back into place. But in my mind, I was already several steps ahead. She was playing right into my hands. The next morning, I made my way to work with a clear mission. I walked straight to my boss's office, knocked, and stepped inside when Noah, my manager, waved me in. "Leo, what's up?" he asked, looking at me expectantly. "Noah, I could use a favor," I said, keeping my tone casual. "I'd like to request a business trip to our production site in the next city. An inspection's overdue, and it'd be good to get away for a bit." Noah raised an eyebrow. "A business trip? That's not usually your thing, Leo." I shrugged, hoping I looked relaxed. "Yeah, I've been under a lot of stress lately, and I think it'd do me some good. Plus, I could check on things at the production site. It's been a while since anyone's gone out there." Noah leaned forward, nodding as he considered it. "You know, I've been meaning to send someone for an inspection. It'd be a good opportunity for you. How long would you need?" "A week should be enough," I said, already picturing how everything was going to fall into place. "All right." Noah nodded. "I'll get the paperwork sorted. You'll have everything you need by the end of the week." "Thanks, Noah," I said with genuine appreciation, knowing this alibi would cover me perfectly. Later that day, I received the official papers for the business trip. Signed documents, company authorization, everything I'd need to make my absence completely legitimate. That evening, when I got home, I made a point of casually showing Mia the paperwork as we sat down for dinner. "Looks like I've got a business trip lined up," I said, handing her the papers. "I'll be gone for a week starting Monday." Mia scanned the documents briefly, handing them back with a nonchalant smile. "A week, huh? Well, I'll miss you, but work is work, right?" "Exactly," I replied, keeping my tone even, as though this were just routine. She didn't suspect a thing, and that was exactly what I wanted. Over the next few days, with my alibi secured, I set my plan into motion. I reached out to a group of young event planners who specialized in flash mobs and public stunts. After a bit of searching, I found a team intrigued by my request, willing to pull off something different. We met at a small cafe a few miles from my house, where I laid out every detail of what I wanted. A stage scene, crafted to leave Mia rattled, humiliated, and questioning her own reputation. Nothing too harsh, but it had to be calculated and unforgettable. "So, you want us to stage a show?" One of the organizers asked, clearly intrigued yet slightly puzzled. I nodded, my expression serious. Exactly. I want something that'll make her think twice. Something that'll shake her up without crossing the line. The group exchanged glances, starting to brainstorm. We can do that, one of them said, smiling. Trust me, if you want her to feel the heat, we can deliver. When Monday morning arrived, I left for my business trip with all the official papers in order. Mia saw me off without a second thought, believing everything had smoothed over between us. She had no idea what was coming. Like any other day, Mia started her morning routine with a stop at her usual cafe, the one near her office. The comforting scent of fresh pastries greeted her as she stepped inside, a small escape from her daily grind. She ordered her coffee, and as she reached for her cup, a man in a sharp business suit appeared beside her. He looked at her with a slight, knowing smile. "Oh, it's you," he said, his tone dripping with an exaggerated warmth. "I recognize you. You're the one who's so generous with her colleagues, right?" Mia froze, the man's words hitting her like a slap. She stared at him, her heart racing. "Excuse me," she managed to stammer, completely caught off guard. The man chuckled, his gaze serious, but with a hint of twisted amusement. "Just so kind of you, really. Not many people would be that giving to their co-workers." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, stunned and bewildered. She stood there a moment, trying to make sense of what had just happened. It must be some mistake, she told herself, trying to shrug it off as she grabbed her coffee and croissant, though her mind was already spinning. The next morning, Mia returned to the cafe, though the strange encounter from the day before lingered in her mind. She tried to brush it off. People made strange comments all the time. It didn't have to mean anything. But as she stepped up to the counter, an elderly gentleman, dressed impeccably, shuffled up beside her. He turned to her with a warm smile, his eyes lighting up as if he recognized her. "Oh, madam," he said, his voice full of admiration. "I've heard about your generosity. It's really something to see, so inspiring. Not everyone would sacrifice so much for career success. It's a real feat of selflessness." Mia's face went pale, her heart pounding as his words sank in. She blinked, speechless, her stomach twisting into knots. She looked at him, eyes wide and frantic. "What? What are you talking about?" she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Some old guy nearby just shook his head and waved his hand, looking amused. "Oh, don't be modest. Word spreads fast about folks like you. Always so selfless, so accommodating at work. Quite the reputation you're building," he said with a smile before turning away. Mia's hand started to shake as she picked up her coffee, probably wondering just how much this stranger knew. She looked rattled, her mind no doubt racing as she realized it couldn't be a coincidence. Two strangers had approached her now, dropping hints she didn't like. But how did they know? I can picture her stumbling out of that cafe, looking dazed and paranoid. She must have felt that paranoia creeping in her chest as she walked back to the office, trying to shake it off. I'm guessing she kept circling back to that night with Oliver, the one night she thought nobody else knew about. But now, twice in 1 week, random people had made these insinuating comments. By midweek, I could tell Mia was on edge. She looked wound up, nervous as a cat, and from her expression, I knew she was barely holding it together. She might have convinced herself that the first few encounters were flukes, but it was only a matter of time before her paranoia crept back. And then, there she was at the cafe again, trying to go about her day, but I bet she felt that dread as soon as she stepped inside. She placed her order and waited, probably watching everyone with that nervous look in her eyes, just as the barista called her name. And then, another young woman with a tray full of drinks stopped beside her, giving her that look of recognition. "Oh, you that woman, aren't you?" she said with a too bright smile. "My friend works with you and told me how kind you are, especially to the man at the office." I imagine the girl winked then, like it was all a big joke. They for being so caring. Mia must have felt her stomach drop. She grabbed her coffee and fled, in a full-blown panic by the time she got back to the office. By the time she finally called me, I could hear the desperation in her voice before she even finished saying hello. "Leo, something really weird is going on," she blurted out. "People. Strangers. They're making comments about me about that night. It's like they know Leo. They know. I was already irritated just listening to her. But I paused, wondering how on earth she expected me to respond to this mess. Mia, I said, feeling the edge of my voice. Why are you bringing this up again? We agreed to let it go. But she kept on, her voice shaky, practically pleading. I know, but this feels different. Someone spreading rumors? Or, are you involved? I had to bite back my frustration. Mia, are you serious right now? You think I'm spreading this? I've moved on. Why can't you? She tried to cut in again, but I had no patience left. Mia, listen. I'm busse. I don't have time for this. I switched to video, showing her that I was out on the factory floor, in a hard hat and safety vest with real work to do. See? I'm here doing my job. I don't have time to care about the past, Mia. Stop calling me with this. I could see her face fall, but I didn't care. I'm sorry, she whispered, sounding pathetic. It's just strange. I got to go, I said flatly. Don't call me unless it's important. And that was it. I ended the call. After that, she wouldn't call again, but it must have gnawed at her because she didn't seem to let up. She started feeling like everyone knew her secret. I could only imagine her horror when it hit her. Oliver. He was the only other one who knew. She figured he had let something slip, or maybe he was the one behind the rumors. I imagined the panic in her twisted into something more urgent, something desperate, and she couldn't stand not knowing if Oliver had betrayed her. When she finally tracked him down, I picture her marching right into his office, closing the door behind her without a word. Oliver, she would have hissed, leaning in so nobody else could hear. Did you tell anyone about that night? Poor Oliver looked up, confused and not sure what she meant at first. What? Mia, what are you talking about? Her eyes narrowed, her voice tense with accusation. You know exactly what I mean. Did you slip up and tell someone? Oliver's face went pale when he realized what she was asking. No, Mia. I wouldn't, but she didn't buy it, seething as she pressed him. Don't lie to me, Oliver. If management finds out, we're both done here. You know how strict the company is. She leaned closer, the frustration boiling over. Are you stupid? Do you have any idea what this could do to us? Oliver, terrified, raised his hands in defense. Mia, he swear. I haven't told a soul. I wouldn't risk my career for this. Shivi looked him over, searching for any trace of a lie, but all she saw was his confusion and fear. Realizing it wasn't him, she'd back off, her mind reeling. If it wasn't Oliver, then who? She left his office feeling even more lost, her thoughts spiraling in confusion. All the strange encounters, the comments from strangers, it didn't add up. A cold dread had settled over her. She even wondered if she was losing her mind, or if someone was deliberately messing with her. The rest of her day crawled by, each minute heavy with paranoia. By the time she left the office, her nerves were frayed beyond repair. Clutching a folder of documents to her chest, she headed outside, lost in her thoughts. Then, out of nowhere, some young guy bumped into her, knocking the folder from her hands and scattering papers across the pavement. Oh, I'm so sorry, he said quickly, bending down to help her collect them. She crouched down too, barely keeping her frustration in check. It's fine. My fault, she muttered, grabbing the last of the papers. Thanks for the help. The guy would have given her a strange smile, his eyes glinting with a look she couldn't quite place. I can imagine the scene as if I were there, watching that smug guy look Mia up and down, his voice smooth as he brushed himself off. No need to thank me verbally, he said, standing there with a grin that made her skin crawl. How about a night with you to show your appreciation for saving those documents? Mia's face must have gone white, her eyes locking onto his in shock. What did you just say? She asked, her voice shaky, no doubt from both anger and disbelief. The guy's grin only widened, and I could almost hear the sleaze in his voice. I can see it in your eyes. You like to think, don't you? Especially when it's career-related, right? Mia's temper flared, and before she could stop herself, she threw the folder right at him. You sick bastard, she shouted, her voice trembling with fury. I won't leave a wet spot of you. Instead of backing down, the guy let out a sinister laugh, the kind that sends chills down your spine. Then he turned and bolted down the street, disappearing before she could even think of chasing him. She stood there, frozen in place, her whole body trembling with a mix of rage and fear. She felt like the ground was shifting under her, like the entire world was somehow conspiring to humiliate her at every turn. It was as if everyone knew her secret, and they were mocking her, reminding her of that night with Oliver. That evening, Mia sat alone in her dimly lit living room, clutching a glass of wine with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. She barely touched her dinner. Just picture her sitting there, mind replaying every event from the past few days over and over. No amount of wine seemed to calm her. I knew she must have felt like she was unraveling, that none of this made any sense. Who were these people? How did they know about her? Or worse, was she starting to lose her mind? The more she thought about it, the more she probably wondered if she was imagining it all. If guilt over what she'd done with Oliver was eating away at her sanity. Her hands trembling, she finally grabbed her phone and opened her browser, fingers hesitating before she typed in, "psychotherapist near me." As the list of names appeared on her screen, she stared blankly, the realization sinking in. Mia needed help. Either someone was playing an elaborate, cruel game, or her mind was beginning to betray her. Either way, she was on the edge of something she couldn't control. By Friday morning, she barely holding it together, her nerves shot after everything that had happened. Determined to avoid another humiliating encounter, Mia made up her mind. No coffee stops, no lingering on the street. She'd head straight to the office and dive into her work. Maybe if she threw herself into her tasks, she could finally push this nightmare out of her mind. With that plan in mind, she arrived at the office early, hoping for a quiet, uneventful day. And at first, it seemed like it might actually work. By the time her co-workers started trickling in, Mia was already at her desk, typing furiously, her mind focused. The usual morning chatter filled the room, and for the first time all week, she felt like she had control again. A small sigh of relief, probably her first in days, escaped her as she thought, finally, some peace. But it didn't last. Not even an hour later, the office door swung open, and in walked a courier, carrying a massive bouquet of red roses. Heads turned instantly, curious eyes following him as he moved into the middle of the office and announced loudly, "Delivery for Mia." Her stomach twisting, heat creeping up her face as everyone stared. The whole office was watching, smirking, whispering. Mia stood up slowly, her heart racing, and walked over to the courier, trying to keep her voice steady. "I didn't order anything," she said sharply. "Why are these flowers addressed to me?" The courier shrugged, giving her an innocent look, and pulled out a small card nestled among the roses. Clearing his throat, he began to read the note in a voice loud enough for the entire office to hear. "For the most alluring and most divine Mia, who made me happy that magical night. Signed, Oliver." The whole room went dead silent for a split second, and then came the laughter, the whispers, the murmurs. Mia stood there, frozen in horror as the blood drained from her face. The judgmental stares of her co-workers burned into her, some of them trying to hide their smirks, others not even bothering. In a burst of fury, Mia lunged forward and knocked the bouquet from the courier's hands, scattering roses across the floor. "What the hell is this?" she screamed, her voice cracking with a mix of humiliation and rage. "What kind of disgusting joke are you playing?" Her co-workers, still laughing, exchanged looks, some trying to calm her down, but Mia was too far gone, her nerves snapping under the pressure. "Mia, calm down." One co-worker tried, though from what I hear, the smirk on her face made it clear she was enjoying the show. But for Mia, it was an absolute nightmare, made even worse by the fact that Oliver wasn't there to explain himself. As fate would have it, he'd been called to another office by their boss, leaving her to face the humiliation alone. As Mia's shouts echoed through the office, the courier backed away, looking like he wanted to disappear. Just then, the door to Mr. Brooks's office flew open, and out he came, his face a mix of confusion and irritation. He took one look at the scene, Mia shouting, the bouquet on the floor, the courier trying to make his escape, and stepped in quickly. "What the hell is going on here?" Mr. Brooks demanded, his gaze shifting from Mia to the scattered flowers and finally landing on the card. He bent down, picked it up, and scanned the words. His face hardened, the lines deepening with each second. Mia, he said sternly, holding up the note. What is this? What's going on? And how am I supposed to understand this? Mia, still shaking with anger, looked back at him, probably struggling to form a coherent answer. Her mind must have been a chaotic mix of shame, rage, and confusion, while all around her, her co-workers whispered louder, passing judgment with every glance. Mr. Brooks pressed her again, his voice growing sharper. Mia? As I heard it, Mr. Brooks eyed Mia carefully, suspicion darkening his face as he held up the card. Did Oliver really send you these flowers? He asked, his voice sharp. Are you two in a relationship? Mia, you're married. And you know the company policy, don't you? No, Mia screamed, her voice breaking. This is all a setup, a sick joke. I would never. But her words seemed to falter, catching in her throat, and her hands trembled uncontrollably. Mr. Brooks watched her closely, his brow furrowed with a mix of concern and doubt. Mia, he said slowly, almost like he was trying to reason with her. You're not making any sense. You're acting irrational. If Oliver's involved in this, I need to know. Otherwise, you're putting your whole career at risk. Mia's eyes darted around the room, heart racing, as she took in the stares of her co-workers, the judgment, the laughter, the whispers, all closing in around her like a trap. It's not true, she shouted, but her voice was weaker this time, less convincing. I don't know what's happening. Someone's trying to ruin me. I can picture her falling apart right there, surrounded by her so-called peers. Mr. Brooks took a long breath, visibly trying to keep his patience. Mia, you need to calm down, he said, his voice firm but not unkind. Meanwhile, her co-workers were either biting back smirks or exchanging knowing glances, some suppressing laughter, while others openly enjoyed the spectacle. The weight of it all must have felt unbearable to her. Standing at the center of the mess, Mr. Brooks could see she was barely hanging on, her face pale, hands shaking. He knew he had to defuse the situation, not just for her, but for the sake of the entire office, which was buzzing with whispers. Trying to lighten the mood, he forced a smile and raised his voice. All right, everyone, enough gawking. Back to work. This is a workplace, after all. He even chuckled a bit, hoping to ease the tension with a deep, playful tone. Mia, take a couple of days off, he added, still smiling. We'll sort this out, and hey, maybe a lie detector test with you and Oliver would settle things once and for all. Trust but verify, right? He chuckled, clearly trying to pass it off as a misunderstanding. But he had no idea just how far gone Mia was. Suddenly, Mia snapped, a dam bursting inside her. Yes, I slept with Oliver, she shouted, her voice raw with fury and humiliation. The entire office fell dead silent, every head turning. I rode him like a young stallion, and I enjoyed every second of it. And the rest of you, you're just a bunch of miserable, nosy bastards with nothing better to do than dig into other people's lives. Gasps filled the room, her co-workers exchanging wide-eyed glances. Realizing what she'd just said, Mia's face flushed, her eyes brimming with tears as she tried to hold herself together. But it was too late. The words were out, and the shock had silenced the office. In a wild, frantic rush, she grabbed her purse and bolted toward the door, her sobs breaking the stunned silence as she stormed out. She didn't get far before practically crashing into Oliver, who had just returned from an assignment. He stopped in his tracks, taken aback by the state she was in, his usual calm expression replaced by one of confusion. Before he could say a word, Mia shouted at him, her voice thick with anger and humiliation. Tell them, Oliver. Tell them how we were rolling around at your place. They're all dying to know the details because their lives are just so boring and gray, stuck in this miserable office. Oliver froze, the color draining from his face. His eyes darted around the room, taking in the shocked faces of their co-workers. Mia's words hung heavy in the air, like a suffocating cloud. Mia, why? He asked, barely able to get the words out. Why would you tell everyone? It was our secret. His voice was weak, almost pleading, and he looked completely lost, as if his entire world had just crumbled. Mr. Brooks stepped forward, his face devoid of any humor now, as he focused on Oliver. "So it's true?" he asked, his voice weighed down with disappointment. "There really was something between you two?" Oliver looked down at the floor, his face ashen. "I didn't tell anyone," he mumbled. "I swear I didn't." Mr. Brooks pinched the bridge of his nose, exhaling in frustration. "Well, that's it then," he muttered, barely loud enough for those nearby to hear. Turning to Oliver, he shook his head. "We're going to have a serious conversation right now." As Oliver followed Mr. Brooks into his office, the rest of the staff erupted into quiet murmurs, exchanging glances and hushed comments about everything they'd just witnessed. Mia's explosive confession, her breakdown, and Oliver's stunned reaction. The office had been thrown into complete chaos, and no one could focus on work after that. Saturday rolled around, and I returned home, feeling a mix of satisfaction and curiosity. I'd set things in motion with Mia's downfall, but I had no idea just how far things had spiraled in my absence. The second I stepped inside, I could feel the tension thick in the air. I found Mia sitting at the kitchen table, clutching a glass of wine in her trembling hand, her eyes wild with a mix of desperation and madness. This was a woman who used to carry herself with so much confidence, now looking completely broken. I knew right away something was off. Mia looked at me, with a face twisted in pure fury the second I walked in. She practically leapt up from the table, pointing an accusing finger my way. "You," she screamed. "You did this. You set me up, didn't you? You planned all of it." I took a step back, raising my hands, playing innocent. "Mia, calm down. What are you talking about? I didn't do anything." But she wasn't hearing any of it. She advanced on me, her eyes wild, full of rage and desperation. "You wanted to ruin me. You wanted to humiliate me in front of everyone." "Mia," I said softly, keeping my voice steady. "I'm your husband. Why would I do something like that? I didn't arrange anything. Let's just talk, okay?" But she was beyond reason. Her hands shook violently as she closed the gap between us, her face pale with anger. Then, without warning, she spun around, lunging for the counter and grabbing a large kitchen tool. She turned back to me, her expression crazed as she held the blade, her voice shaking with fury. "I'll make you pay for this," she shrieked, waving the tool in my direction. "You think you can destroy me and just walk away?" My heart pounded, but I kept calm, moving backward while slowly pulling my phone from my pocket to dial 911. "Mia," I said, my voice low and firm, "put the tool down. You're not thinking clearly. You need help." But Mia only tightened her grip on it, eyes narrowing. "You ruined my life, Leo. You made me look like a fool. You set me up, you monster." She ranted on, her voice rising, until I heard the police pounding at the door. Within moments, they burst in, assessing the scene. Mia, still waving the tool around, was screaming incoherently. They approached her gently, disarmed her, and led her out in handcuffs. Her face was contorted in anguish, her words tumbling out in a stream of jumbled nonsense as they took her away. I watched her go, feeling a strange blend of pity and relief. She was lost to her madness, and now it was finally over. At the hospital, the doctors confirmed she'd suffered a severe nervous breakdown, and they put her under psychiatric care. For me, it was the perfect opening to finalize what I'd been planning for weeks. With Mia hospitalized, I moved swiftly. I contacted my lawyer, withdrew a large sum from our joint account, and shifted it into a private one. Then I drafted divorce papers. By the time Mia returned home, she walked into an empty house. The only thing I left was a stack of documents on the kitchen counter. The divorce papers and a simple note instructing her not to contact me. It wasn't long before her anger flared again. Days later, she reached out, furious about the missing money, throwing accusations of theft my way. But I was ready. I met her, my expression calm, but unyielding. "I didn't steal anything, Mia," I said, my voice cold and steady. "But I'll tell you this. I got footage from our house cameras. They recorded you coming at me with a tool. So if you're looking to play hardball, I can press charges for attempted murder." Her face went white as the reality sank in, her bravado faltering. I stepped closer, leaning in as I delivered the final blow. "You've gone insane, Mia. You did this to yourself. I tried to live the way you wanted, pretend like nothing happened. But you destroyed everything with your lies and your insanity. Her anger crumbled into panic, and she whispered, barely holding it together, You can't do this." "Oh, I can," I replied, my voice like ice. "And I already have. You're not getting a dime from me. You've lost it all. And if you push me any further, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what happened." With no other choice, Mia signed the divorce papers, defeated. Her job was gone, her reputation ruined, and Oliver was fired too. The office scandal had spread like wildfire. Meanwhile, I walked away, free from the nightmare Mia had created. My revenge was complete. I'd been patient. I played my part, and now Mia's own actions had sealed her downfall.